being joined by Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at University College Dublin. He joins us live from Birmingham. Thank you for joining, Professor. I'd like to begin my first question, where Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that his country is preparing for a ground invasion on one hand, and Macron says that a ground invasion would be an error. Now, how is Europe at large looking at Israel's aggressive position?
Well, we've actually been waiting for this ground offensive for about 12 days. And not just Europe, but much of the international community has been telling the Israeli leadership, especially behind closed doors, that a ground offensive, as well as the indiscriminate bombing of the civilians in Gaza, is not the way to proceed. That if you want to get some distance between people in Gaza and Hamas after Hamas's mass murders inside Israel, you need to do it by isolating Hamas, by using political and economic measures, by bringing in, for example, the Arab states to isolate Hamas, and you will actually not achieve that with intensive military action. In fact, you'll achieve the opposite. You'll have world opinion turning against Israel. Now, those calls, including by Mr. Macron yesterday, have delayed the Israeli ground offensive. What we have is Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu again beating his chest and saying, "Don't worry, we're going in soon." I think, to put it bluntly to you, we now have a contest between whether Israel invades on the ground or whether we get significant humanitarian aid into Gaza to help civilians. You cannot have both.
And I want to talk about the summit in Brussels that will be actually the first in-person meeting of the EU's 27 national leaders since the conflict started on October 7th. What, in your opinion, are going to be some key issues in focus during this discussion?
What the EU has already agreed on in advance of this meeting today is that it will make a call for a humanitarian pause to get assistance into Gaza and thus effectively delay the Israeli ground offensive. It will not call for a ceasefire because a ceasefire is going farther. A ceasefire indicates that you have an indefinite halt to military operations on both sides, and clearly Israel's not going to halt its airstrikes at this point. But the humanitarian pause is the first step. Then I think you're going to see the EU talking about the need to reach out to other elements of the international community to try to coordinate action, to keep this focus on the humanitarian situation, to try to get Israel to dial down the attacks, which have killed thousands of Gazans. I can't tell you those efforts will be successful, but I do think the EU is moving towards a common line along with other countries. For example, just a couple of hours ago, Japan has also criticized the Israeli attacks and called for humanitarian assistance to get into Gaza immediately.
Talking about humanitarian pause, firstly, I have two sort of questions related to this. Firstly, is that is this actually the middle way between Israel's, on one hand, Israel's right to defend itself, and on the other, the others calling for ceasefire? Is the humanitarian pause actually going to serve the purpose? Because the huge population of Gaza, which is 2.1 million, and this is the second part to my question, a singular humanitarian pause, would it be enough to deliver sufficient aid?
That's a great question. I think the first thing I would say is that much of the international community have agreed that defending Israel to make sure that you don't get the mass murders that you saw by Hamas on October 7th includes easing Hamas out of power in Gaza by isolating it, by finding an alternative to Hamas to govern the Gaza Strip. But that leads you to the second part of what you're asking, which is, well, how do you do that? You have to do that by giving some hope to Gaza's civilians. So first of all, you must make sure that this isn't just a single humanitarian effort. It has got to be a sustained humanitarian effort. So far, we've only had about 54 trucks with humanitarian aid go in through the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza. The World Health Organization says you need more than 2,000. You need electricity to be restored. You need to bring water in. You need to bring in vital supplies to start to begin sustaining people to give them basic food and shelter, and then to look to reconstruction. So no, you're absolutely right. If this is just a one-off humanitarian pause that is quickly over, it doesn't get us any further in trying to help civilians and to move to an eventual resolution of the conflict, to break the cycle of violence.
Still seems to be a very precarious situation, even if a single humanitarian pause comes into action. But thank you so much, Professor Lucas, for joining us and giving us your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thanks to you and your viewers.